offensive by the NFL. Maybe Carr should have done Michael's moonwalk. No debates, no speculation, just the info you need. That's your KBLA Sports Minute. I'm Ray Richardson. More news, opinions, and conversation when we come forward on KBLA Talk 1580.
I need your dollar, that's what I need.
KBLA Talk 1580 celebrates small businesses, the enduring lifeblood of our community, with the launch of the KBLA SMB Marketplace. For the first time, small to medium-sized businesses will have an opportunity to promote their goods and services on KBLA and take advantage of our powerful reach and local marketing power. The SMB Marketplace is hosted exclusively on KBLA1580.com and is accessible from all our social media channels. Whether you're a small mom and pop restaurant, a car dealership, or a professional practitioner, we invite you to join in this new KBLA Talk 1580 initiative to promote your business. As a Black-owned small business, you don't want to miss this unique opportunity to gain new customers on KBLA Talk 1580. For more information, contact us today at smb@kbla1580.com. That's smb@kbla1580.com. At KBLA Talk 1580, we've got your black.
And if I share with you my story, would you share your dollar with me? Time to get it.
Tavis Smiley's new book, The Covenant with Black America, 20 years later, is now on sale everywhere. This classic text shot to #1 on the New York Times bestsellers list almost 2 decades ago. If you have the original book, you will surely want to get this 20th anniversary edition with powerful new contributions from today's leading voices. This 20th anniversary edition presents a compelling blend of historical insights and contemporary urgency in this critical and unprecedented election year. Get your copy of The Covenant with Black America 20 years later today.
You're on the air. What do you feel when you hear a record like Tupac's new one?
I love Tupac's new record.
Right, but don't you feel like that creates tension between East and West? He's talking about killing people. I had sex with your wife, and not in those words. But he's talking about, I want to see you deceased.
Look there. To live and die in L.A., California. What you say about Los Angeles? Still the only place for me that never rains in the sun. To live and die in L.A., where every day we try to fatten our pockets. Us against hustle for the cash, so it's hard to knock. Everybody got their own thing, currency chasing. Worldwide through the hard times, worrying faces. Shed tears as we bury singing close to heart. What was a friend, now a ghost in the dark. Cold part about it, it got smoked by a fiend. Trying to floss on him, blind to a broken man's dream. A hard lesson, court cases keep him guessing. Plea bargain ain't an option now, so I'm stressing. Cost me more to be free than a life in the pen. Making money off of cuss words, writing again. Learn how to think ahead, so I fight with my pen. Late night down, sunset, like in the zen. What's the worst they can do to a nigga? Got me lost in hell to live and die in L.A. on bail. My angel sing.
KBLA Talk 1580. We are talking reparations because it is a Freedman Friday. We do this the second hour of the show every single Friday. And I'm really excited to talk a little bit more about the Los Angeles Reparations Advisory Commission and the study that has now been, at least the executive summary, has been released, welcoming in a professor and chair of the Africana Studies Department at Cal State Northridge. She is one of a group of scholars who worked with the commission and the Department of Civil Rights here in Los Angeles to come up with this report. Dr. Marquita Gamage, welcome.
Thank you so much, Dominique. I appreciate the opportunity to talk with you this morning.
Yeah, it was really interesting, the presentation that you guys did, and then reading when the report was unveiled at Cal State Northridge, and then reading this summary, very eye-opening. Let's start just a little bit with the process. It was a group of scholars, and what did you guys do?
Yes, so there were 5 primary researchers and additional research consultants who joined us. We were invited by the city after securing the application grant to study the experiences of Black Angelenos with the goal of identifying harms and addressing those harms through recommendations for reparations. And so what we did was we launched a study at the beginning of last year, and we began our landscape analysis where we were looking at the historical and contemporary environment of Black Angelenos and how the city, its organizations, its institutions, its departments may have impacted the Black community. We also, in June of 2023, launched the Black Experience study that included the comprehensive survey, as well as focus groups and interviews with local residents, community activists, and different individuals throughout the city in order to gain a fuller understanding of the experiences, the harms, and we identified those 12 areas of harms as were identified by the state in their reparations study. So at the conclusion of that, we presented those harms findings, and just last week, we hosted 3 community workshops where we got to engage the community on their thoughts about the findings and recommendations for reparations based on their experiences and what we found.
And then, so my understanding is you guys worked with the surveys that were completed by people. You did your own analysis and listening sessions, and then these community meetings, these community input sessions that happened last week, will all be part of a final report that we're going to get maybe in October or November. Is that what the process is?
Yes, the goal is to complete it by this fall. We're aiming for that time frame. And then we'll turn that report over to the commission. And then the commission has the task of reviewing that report and making recommendations as a result of their own studies and this larger study to the city in regards to reparations for Black Angelenos.
Right, and then from what I heard at the unveiling of this summary, which, by the way, is available at LA, it's civilandhumanrights.lacity.gov, or you can just do what I did, Google search it, and it'll pop up. Then it'll go before the LA City Council, and I guess we'll start looking at policies and such. But tell me about this group of 5 scholars, of which, you are one that gave quite a dynamic presentation, and what your goal was in terms of taking all this data and putting it into a report.
Yes, thank you. So 3 of the scholars are from our very own Africana Studies Department here at Cal State Northridge. It's one of the oldest and largest Africana Studies Department in the nation. So the first is our lead principal investigator, Dr. Stanford. I'm the second lead. Then comes Dr. Selassie, Danielle Bram, as well as Brianne Posey. We also had Dr. Steve Graves and Herman DeBose as well, who were working on the project and contributing a significant amount, especially in relation to the mapping of the movements of African Americans into and out of the city.
And as far as, I'm assuming, because you're scholars, that the idea is, well, let's see what we find.
Yes. So some of the stuff, because many of us are subject area experts in different areas of the study, some of us already had large area of exposure. For example, Dr. Stanford is a political scientist by training, very well versed and published in Black Los Angeles experiences as an illustration. And so we went in with a targeted approach of studying those 12 areas that included multiple layers of looking at historical documents, looking at a lot of that, for example, in the areas of health, injustices and health inequities, looking at a lot of both the city and the county data. We did run into several challenges with ascertaining information from the city because there's not a repository of information available on Black Angelenos. Instead, we had to do a lot of separating the data from county data, for example, relying on other reports as another illustration in order to really dive into that research for the landscape analysis.
That's really interesting because it seems to show how important it is, the bill that was passed this past year about aggregating, data and pulling out data, disaggregating data, taking it out from the state, and which we're going to start doing, but it's remarkable that that hasn't been done up until now. The Another interesting thing, I don't know if you want to comment a little more, is that you said you based those 12 areas of harm or 12 areas of study on the state task force. So here you have the work of the 2 years of labor put in by the California Reparations Task Force, acting as some kind of a resource in a city action.
Yes, that larger report from the state really honed in on some of the major challenges experienced by Black Americans in general. And so our task is to then hone in on those 12 to see how have Black Angelenos been impacted. And some areas are much stronger than others in terms of direct data, in terms of the impact. For example, whereas other areas still require more research as there's limited data in these certain areas. But we looked at things like the impact of slavery, and although slavery existed in Los Angeles before the United States officially annexed California, and so technically the city wasn't a chartered, right, an official city as of yet, it still had major impacts on the experiences of Black folks as they moved into the area, the fugitive slave laws that were enacted, and forcing individuals to return African people who escaped enslavement. During the Jim Crow era, you still saw segregation. You saw segregated housing, segregated schools, segregated hospitals. All of that stuff shows up in the report because those things had a severe impact on the lives and life satisfaction for Black Angelenos.
Yeah. So correct me if I'm wrong, but it sounds like in some cases the city may have been saying, well, there was slavery before we were incorporated as a city or chartered, so we won't count that, even though it's part of the environment that the city was built on.
Yes, it is a part of the environment. And so that was our job, to demonstrate how, since its establishment as an official city, right, in the state of California, how have Black Angelenos been harmed? But we cannot discount the history prior to that because it definitely set the tone and created the landscape from which Black Angelenos reside, even to this day. For example, the issue with sundown towns. That was an impact that came as a result of segregating African Americans that prevented them from having access to certain communities. And we still see some sundown towns existing in Los Angeles and Southern California in general. But those type of impacts, whether they started before the charter or after, or the impact of neighborhood vigilante groups or white supremacist terrorist groups, for example, they may have started prior to that, but that impact in their presence still remained after the city was chartered, after, for example, different policies were enacted. And so it's important to study the history behind how these things came into existence, but also our job was to take a deep dive into how they actually impacted Black Angelenos.
Yeah, and I've said repeatedly, there were things I thought I knew the city. I've been living here a long time, and I report the news every day, and I'm really interested in paying attention to reparations. But for example, I had no idea there were so many KKK chapters in Los Angeles.
Yes, and neither did I until we dived into the data. That became really revealing. I know folks are like, are they even in existence anymore? Well, there's still evidence that these groups still exist and still operate. And as a result of that, there are still impacts that are happening. And so it's important to kind of look at how these groups have been instrumental in what we term racial terror, for example. And also they were very impactful in helping to keep communities segregated. That meant that if they were terrorizing individuals who tried to buy land in certain communities or purchase homes in certain communities, as an illustration, then it made it much more difficult for them to buy into more affluent neighborhoods that were valued at a higher price point, that can secure healthier home loans, as an illustration. But many people don't realize that those types of vigilante groups, and the KKK in particular, there was a major center here in Los Angeles that really helped accelerate experiences of racial violence for blacks residing in the city of Los Angeles.
I mean, you guys actually have this mapped out in the report, and I count 15 chapters of the KKK. Of course, there's one in Torrance. And it looks like 2 in the Santa Monica, Santa Monica, Marina Del Rey area. And so we don't have any evidence that this actually went away? Is that what you're saying?
Well, there's still evidence to demonstrate that there is still presence of these types of vigilante groups. They weren't the only ones.
Right.
But there is still evidence of these types of groups that exist in the area.
Yeah, to that point, I mean, you guys actually, I can't find it right this second, but you actually named some other groups that were local vigilante groups. So these are housing codes and covenants and such, but they're being enforced by extrajudicial groups.
Yes, but they were also enforced. Let us not skip over the enforcement from LAPD. LAPD played a major role in policing the black community and enforcing and upholding racial segregation through these. And so some of the ways in which this was enacted was through racially restrictive covenants, for example. This is what the community could do to prevent individuals from buying into those communities. For example, they would put these covenants inside of their deeds. As an illustration, prohibiting them from selling these homes to people of color, and in particular to African Americans. So these clauses in the deeds of homes, they were designed to keep certain people out of those areas and keep those neighborhoods exclusively white. And anti-black racial violence, especially from the KKK, but also coupled with police brutality, was used to force and keep black residents out of quote-unquote white neighborhoods. But then you saw general racial segregation that prohibited African Americans, and which was legal, right? These things were legal. I want to emphasize that, because even after they were no longer legal, they were enforced by community vigilantes and still supported by the state's institutions such as the LAPD. So what we saw with racial segregation is that these were state-mandated requirements preventing racial groups from accessing certain spaces, schools, neighborhoods, hospitals, and other institutions, what were typically reserved for whites only. But then also in terms of the housing area, you had redlining taking place as well.
Hold that thought, Dr. Gamage. We'll continue that on the other side. It's just a fascinating report. LA Advisory Commission on Reparations. The report just out. We'll continue straight ahead on KBLA Talk 1580.
She's reclaiming her time on KBLA Talk 1580. More First Things First with Dominique DiPrima when we come forward. Tavis Smiley's new book, The Covenant with Black America, 20 years later, is now on sale everywhere. This classic text shot to #1 on the New York Times bestsellers list almost 2 decades ago. If you have the original book, you will surely want to get this 20th anniversary edition with powerful new contributions from today's leading voices. This 20th anniversary edition presents a compelling blend of historical insights and contemporary urgency in this critical and unprecedented election year. Get your copy of The Covenant with Black America 20 years later today.
Have you noticed the hype around retinol lately? It's all over my social media. But did you know you can get retinol in a body wash? Amazing, right? Olay Retinol Body Wash is packed with moisturizing vitamin B3 complex plus retinol to transform dry skin to visibly renewed in just 14 days. Try it the next time you shower and see the difference for yourself with Olay Retinol Body Wash for visibly renewed skin in just 14 days. And try Olay Retinol 24 Body Lotion.
Are you wet shaving? You'll get razor bumps.
Nah, Pops. I'm good with Gillette Skin Guard. How long you been growing that beard Mama hates anyway?
Since 77. I shaved and got ingrown so bad.
That's why I use the Gillette Skin Guard razor, face scrub, shave gel, and moisturizer. So I don't have to worry about new razor bumps or shaving irritation.
Gillette Skin Guard, huh? Your mama's gonna love this one.
The best a man can get keeps getting better with Gillette Skin Guard. Buy now at a retailer near you.
Girl, I have a secret. When I get stressed out, I get sweaty. That's why I use Secret Clinical Antiperspirant. It's like my own secret weapon. For 72 hours, I get Secret's strongest protection against sweat caused by stress, heat, and activity, because you know how crazy life can get. Plus, it's made with advanced odor fighters that don't just cover up smelliness. They help prevent it from happening in the first place. Believe me, if I weren't wearing Secret, I'd be a hot, smelly mess. Thankfully, Secret works.
Sweet chocolate reward. Sweet chocolate reward.
This is not just the sound of someone picking up a sweet treat at Walgreens. This is the sound of someone picking up a sweet treat right after receiving all their vaccines in one trip. This is the sound of treating yourself, because you protected yourself.
Stop by or schedule both your flu and COVID-19 vaccines today and grab yourself a sweet treat while you're at it. Vaccine subject to availability. State, age, and health-related restrictions may apply.
Mom, meet Sarah.
From first-time Nana moments.
Welcome to Flight 101.
To annual girls trip moments. Your can't-miss moments are worth protecting against RSV. If you're 75 or older or 60 plus with a chronic condition like asthma, COPD, heart disease, or severe diabetes, you're at higher risk of landing in the hospital from RSV. And there are no prescription RSV treatments. Check eligibility and schedule your RSV vaccine at vaxassist.com.
So where should we go next?
Sponsored by Pfizer.
The conversation continues right now with Dominique DiPrima on First Things First.
It does, and we're talking with Dr. Marquita Gamage. She's Cal State Northridge Chair of the Africana Studies Department, and part of this study, that the preliminary version of which is now available online. I was navigating laisforeveryone.com and also civilandhumanrights.lacity.gov to find these, but you kind of have to click around a bit. Someone was in the chat asking how to find it. What made it come up quickly for me was I just typed in LA Civil Rights Department reparations report, and then it popped up a link to a specific part of that website where I was able to quickly find it. So that's what I would suggest. Dr. Gamage, you were talking about housing covenants and the formal and informal means by which these racially discriminatory policies were enforced, and also how they continue to be enforced even after they were no longer the law.
Yes, and so, for example, in 1963, the Rumford Fair Housing Act attempted to ensure that citizens had equal access to housing, and local citizens in Los Angeles, however, actively worked to undermine and end fair housing practices, which resulted in another law that was Proposition 14 in 1964. Just a year later, that instantly repealed the Rumford Fair Housing Act of 63. Once again reinstating discriminatory practices. And neighborhoods in Los Angeles that restricted Black people from living there saw greater equity growth in their housing prices as a result. So we talk about in the report how neighborhoods with less than 5% of Black populations had the highest equity growth versus those neighborhoods with 50 to 99% or plus or 100% Black residents. You saw much lower equity growth. And so the home values ultimately were impacted by these types of segregation and discriminatory policies.
Right. So we saw less generational wealth by virtue of the fact that we were being segregated and redlined in that way. Do you see, or does the data show, in your opinion, a direct line between these vigilante groups, racist vigilante groups, the KKK and others that were special to Los Angeles, and the current deputy gangs and the persistent racism and police harassment that your study seems to show? 1865 to 1968, 65% of Black Angelenos experiencing police harassment, for example, and 15% unsure, which I'm not sure how that works. But do you see a correlation there?
So there are multiple lines of connecting the streams between the racial terrorism, racial violence, police brutality, and harassment, and the impact on Black Angelenos' overall lives. We see that the result of that is that only 41.5% of Black households own homes in LA versus 68.3% of white households. That's revealing. But when we look at the history of police violence, police harassment, police brutality, this is a long legacy of anti-Black policing that have existed. And our research shows that because of those experiences, Black Angelenos have been impacted severely in terms of their overall quality of life, their access to certain communities to this day. And so such that individuals may still argue that some towns are still not safe once the sun goes down for Black Angelenos to access.
I mean, honestly, I'm not a scientist, but I live in LA, and I could tell you, Torrance, the areas we call Bel Air and Beverly Hills, even though technically that's not LA. And there are others where most of us know you don't want to be driving around Culver City after sundown if you don't have to. I think experientially the data supports what we see with our own eyes.
I think so. And what we found within our focus groups and interviews is that the community story speaks volumes. The data that we found in terms of the numbers, in terms of the arrest rates, for example, or the rates of policing in terms of stops, as an illustration, doesn't even begin to paint the picture of the real experience, right? Those are the numbers, for example, and it's very disproportionate to the overall population. But when we began to talk with the Black community and they talked about the constant fear for themselves, their partners, their children, especially their children going off to schools in certain neighborhoods or colleges, for example, and the fear that they will be harassed. And they oftentimes were. They were reporting that those experiences were experiences where they were met with unnecessary stops and searches, for example. Those things speak volumes to the legitimate impact and harm. And that's why we're calling these the 12 areas of harm, the harm that has been done as a result of racial bias and racialized policing tactics.
And, we just have 20 seconds here till news, traffic, and sports, so I'll just tee it up, and you can address it on the other side. But I see that you also break out the officer-involved shooting victims by race. And, of course, it's something we know, but this is very specific to L.A., and I wonder what story the data is telling. That's next on KBLA Talk 1580.
A safe place to go loud. A great place for progressive politics. KBLA Talk 1580.
I'm Mike Moore. Here's the latest from the Black Information Network. The White House is announcing $3 billion in federal funding for over 24 battery technology projects. The funding is to help the U.S. move toward more climate-friendly and battery-powered energy sources. The new report says U.S. officials believe a ceasefire deal between Israel and Hamas is unlikely before President Biden leaves office. The Wall Street Journal reported Thursday that top officials at the White House, Pentagon, and State Department don't see a ceasefire happening in the coming months. Polls now show Vice President Harris and former President Trump deadlocked less than 7 weeks before the presidential election, according to a survey by the New York Times, the Philadelphia Inquirer, and Siena College. Both are tied at 47% among nearly 2,500 likely voters. And that's the latest. I'm Mike Moore from your 24/7 news source, the Black Information Network, and BINnews.com.
Some people just know you could save money on car insurance by checking Allstate first. Those people are probably saving a carload of cash right now. So what are you waiting for? Check Allstate first for a quote today. You're in good hands with Allstate.
This is the KBLA Sports Minute with Ray Richardson.
Dodger star Shohei Ohtani solidified himself as one of the greatest players in Major League Baseball history. In the Dodgers' 20-4 win in Miami, Ohtani became the first MLB player to reach 50 homers and 50 stolen bases in a season. Ohtani hit 3 homers, stole 2 bases, and had a club record 10 RBIs. Ohtani will also be in the playoffs for the first time in his 7-year career. The Dodgers clinched their 12th straight playoff appearance with Thursday's win. The LA Sparks snapped an 8-game losing streak with a 17-point win at Minnesota last night. The Sparks finished the season 8-32. New Orleans Saints quarterback Derek Carr was fined by the NFL for doing a Michael Jackson move after scoring a touchdown last Sunday against Dallas. Carr grabbed his crotch area, one of Jackson's signature moves, but viewed as offensive by the NFL. Maybe Carr should have done Michael's moonwalk. No debates, no speculation, just the info you need. That's your KBLA Sports Minute. I'm Ray Richardson. More news, opinions, and conversation when we come forward on KBLA Talk 1580.
Linking social justice and climate justice all year long.
We're unapologetically progressive.
KBLA Talk 1580.
October 2nd is California Clean Air Day. Go Metro for free and help cut down on pollution and traffic. It's our way of thanking you because every ride makes a difference. Let's clear the air together. Ready to go right now? Head to metro.net.
KBLA Talk 1580.
We've got a lot to talk about.
KBLA reminds you that when we fight, we win, and we don't black down. LA Community Action Network, or LA CAN, was formed in 1999 when 25 residents of downtown LA came together and acknowledged the problems that existed in their community and made a commitment to do something about those problems, to stand together, organize, and become a force in the community that demands change. Civil rights and preventing the criminalization of poverty are their core projects. In addition, they take on women's rights, the human right to housing, and healthy food access. LA CAN also has projects focused on economic development, civic participation, voter engagement, and community media. While downtown LA remains their home base, with a particular emphasis on the Skid Row community, in 2007, they expanded their housing and healthy food access work into South Central Los Angeles. LA CAN believes that power for low-income people and people of color is achieved through a large, active, and well-informed member base that utilizes a multitude of methods to advance their messages and goals. If you'd like to join the Los Angeles Community Action Network and organize people to fight back against oppression, please visit cangress.org. That's cangress.org. This is a community call to action from KBLA Talk 1580.
Have you noticed the hype around retinol lately? It's all over my social media. But did you know you can get retinol in a body wash? Amazing, right? Olay Retinol Body Wash is packed with moisturizing vitamin B3 complex plus retinol to transform dry skin to visibly renewed in just 14 days. Try it the next time you shower and see the difference for yourself with Olay Retinol Body Wash for visibly renewed skin in just 14 days. And try Olay Retinol 24 Body Lotion.
My friends swim no matter the season, but my moderate to severe plaque psoriasis can sometimes take me out of the moment. Now, thanks to Skyrizi and clear skin, count me in. With Skyrizi Risankizumab Riza, a prescription-only 150 milligram injection for adults who are candidates for systemic or phototherapy. 3 out of 4 people achieve 90% clear skin at 4 months.
Don't use if allergic to Skyrizi. Serious allergic reactions and an increased risk of infections or a lower ability to fight them may occur. Before treatment, your doctor should check for infection and tuberculosis. Tell your doctor if you have an infection or symptoms such as fever, sweats, chills, muscle aches, or cough, or if you plan to or recently received a vaccine.
Thanks to Skyrizi, there's nothing on my skin, and that means everything. Ask your doctor today about Skyrizi, the #1 dermatologist-prescribed biologic in psoriasis, and visit skyrizi.com or call 1-866-SKYRIZI to learn more.
Broadcasting live from Leimert Park, USA. Welcome back to your home for unapologetically progressive radio, KBLA Talk 1580.
It is a Friedman Friday. We're talking with Dr. Marquita Gamage, Cal State Northridge Chair of Africana Studies there. I want to point out that there is a reparations town hall meeting September 28th at the True Vine Church. It's not put on by LA Civil Rights. It's put on by CJEC in response to the state's lawmakers' actions and failure to bring up 2 bills that the community was expecting to be brought forward. Also, the Legislative Black Caucus has a meeting in Oakland on the 29th of September, 2 to 5 p.m. at the DeFremery Recreation Center on Adeline, and folks are showing up there. You can try to register. I think registration is closed, but people are showing up there to show their support and make sure lawmakers know we're tracking this issue. Dr. Marquita Gamage, I brought up the officer-involved shootings. And one of the things I like about this report, aside from really clear summaries in each of these areas of harm, is the fact that these graphics make it very visually clear how these things are playing out. And officer-involved shootings and inmates by race are two that jumped out at me.
Yes, so from 2014 to 2022, out of 325 officer-involved shooting victims, Black Angelenos made up 28% of that total number, 28%, despite being a smaller percentage of the population at only 8%. Which is revealing that impact. Only group that had a larger percentage were Hispanic Latinx, as an illustration. But you also see the arrest rates are out of proportion as well at 27% from 2020 to 2023. The stops were at 26%, and the Black population in Los Angeles only accounts for 8%. So when you think about these numbers, over 25% in each of these areas, you can really begin to see the disparity that is taking place here.
Yeah. I'm laughing because I was looking at the population numbers. We're always complaining about how Black people are becoming a smaller and smaller slice of Los Angeles. But I guess if you go back to 1860, we're like at 1%.
Yes, and so when you look at the population growth, there were several different periods of Blacks migrating into Los Angeles, buying into the idea that Los Angeles was a great place to come into, Southern California in general, to be able to have family stability, grow your financial well-being, for example, build careers, build family, build life. And many Black Angelenos came with those hopes, but when they came here, especially those who migrated from the southern states, found that Southern California is, in fact, very southern.
Yeah.
In that sense, is that there are many similarities between the experiences. And so Los Angeles is not separated from some of these injustices, such that over 68% of respondents are reporting these experiences of police, over-policing, for example.
And also interesting is how you track the way Black populations in certain neighborhoods rise and in certain neighborhoods drop drastically based on policies and that seem, when looking at this data, to specifically herd us into small areas of the city.
Yes, and that's a lot of data linked to what took place with housing. And so there were certain areas of the city where Black Angelenos could only reside. For example, in the San Fernando Valley area, only Pacoima was one of those places where Black residents could reside, as an illustration. And then you saw in other areas where really by the 1930s, large populations of Black Angelenos were regulated to certain neighborhoods in South Park and Watts area, for example, that we known today as, in the Central Alameda area. By the 1930s, about 40,000 Black people were living in Los Angeles, and they were confined to those two neighborhoods. And that was through what we talked about earlier, those racially restrictive covenants, that heavy policing, racial terrorism by neighborhood groups, all kind of helped confine. But then we saw over time, as those neighborhoods became more valued, you then saw different types of community developments that were taking place that were really pricing communities out, in which we know of as gentrification, when residents could no longer reside in those communities because they can no longer afford the basic living expenses. And so you saw major moves of Black migration out of the Los Angeles area into places like Palmdale and Lancaster, and also many left, leaving California altogether.
Yeah, I'm looking at this striking data on the Black population before and after reapportionment in 1956, and you see in the District 7, which is really the valley, right, that it dives.
Yes.
And in District 8, it skyrockets. District 8, District 9, District 10, which is where we still are.
Mm-hmm. Yes, and that has had consequences not just in terms of wealth accumulation, but also in terms of political engagement as well. As you begin to split and the population, right, divide the population by redistricting laws and a whole host of different things, right, the cost of living forcing folks out, what you saw was that political influence began to decrease versus what we saw previously as Black migration into the city. You saw political engagement and representation finally taking place versus when Black migration out began to happen for a multitude of different reasons. You saw that political representation and engagement decrease as a result of the decreased population.
I mean, I feel like we're not even going to be able to cover this at all in just 1 hour. I would encourage folks to get this study and sometimes, and go through it and let's, talk about it in other areas. One of the other things that stayed with me is this idea that Black young people face increased, I'm going to read right here, Black youth face increased victimization in Los Angeles, the failure of government agencies, especially those in the Los Angeles area, to fairly distribute resources, and the racial prejudice of area social workers have contributed to the rise in Black children being removed from their families. And if we look at the persistent struggles of the DCFS, I know that's county, but that's LA City kids, and the probation department, again county, but that covers us. And the state of crisis that we're currently in, it seems like the roots of that are found in this report.
Yes. I mean, we can't even begin to talk about how these atrocities have impacted Black youth, but we do see them in the numbers. The numbers can't hide the reality. So, for example, you mentioned some of them, but I'll share a few more, like the arrest rates per 100,000 youth in Los Angeles County in 2019. Black youth made up 29.9% of that, the largest percent of those arrest rates, for example. You see that they were heavily impacted by Municipal Code 45.04, also known as the daytime curfew law, for example, despite the fact that they only make up around 7% of the child population in Los Angeles County. And it's very difficult to separate that data and say what's happening specifically in the city of Los Angeles. But we see where the largest populations of Black youth reside is largely in the city of Los Angeles. And so when we talk about the impact on Black youth, we see that they are more likely to be represented in foster care system at 24%, despite only making up about that 7%. We see that they're impacted in terms of schooling and school policing, school disciplinary practice, suspension and expulsion rates as another illustration. And so there's a whole host of different impacts that also have been impacting Black youth that we've only begun to scratch the surface of for this particular study. And that part of that challenge is that lack of disaggregated data from this county data.
Yeah. When we come forward, I want to look at some of the recommendations. I know this is preliminary, and I know that the Advisory Commission, the Reparations Advisory Commission for the city, will create their own recommendations, but you have some preliminary ones. I want to talk about that, and also what really jumped out at you, what blew your mind when you were going through this data that you just were not expecting to find. This is a Freedman Friday, and you're listening to KBLA Talk 1580.
More of First Things First with Dominique DiPrima when we come forward.
Have you heard of the 50-30-20 rule? This can help you spend and save your money wisely. So, how does it work? Distribute your dollars into 3 buckets. 50% towards needs, 30% towards your wants, and 20% goes to savings. Use this tool to help your journey to financial success. Sponsored by J.P. Morgan Chase & Company.
We asked seniors how to prevent Medicare scams.
My best advice, if you get a phone call, do not talk to the person. These people are well trained. Don't talk to them.
They don't know me. They're just trying to scam me.
Don't be fooled. Hang up. Just hang up.
Never give out your Medicare number.
They're going to get your number to put in a false claim.
If I get a call from someone, I don't pick up the phone. And should I pick up the phone and they ask for information, then I hang up.
How do you detect Medicare fraud?
Just like I check my credit card statements, I check my Medicare statements monthly.
Scammers can get a hold of your number, order medical devices through your account, and you're not even going to know about it if you don't look at your statement.
Check your statement every month. If you get your statement and you see something that you know you did not have done, you report it.
Call your senior Medicare Patrol.
To report Medicare fraud, call the Senior Medicare Patrol at 855-613-7080.
KBLA Talk 1580.
We've got a lot to talk about.
KBLA Talk 1580 reminding you that we keep us safe. Pro Football Hall of Famer and urban peace pioneer Jim Brown believed in just that. So he founded the AmeriCAN Foundation for Social Change in 1988, focusing on at-risk and high-risk youth in underserved schools and juvenile detention facilities, as well as adult incarceration and reentry initiatives. The core of the AmeriCAN program is its 15-chapter life skills curriculum. Mastery of these skills allows individuals to meet their academic potential, conform their behavior to acceptable societal standards, and improve the quality of their lives by equipping them with what they need to confidently and successfully contribute to society. Today, the foundation is led by its president, Monique Brown, who has been actively involved in the organization for more than 25 years. The AmeriCAN Foundation continues its work in memory of its founder, actor, philanthropist, and NFL legend Jim Brown. To get involved or make a donation, please visit AmeriCANCommunity.partners. That's AmeriCANCommunity.partners. This is a community call to action from KBLA Talk 1580.
Paul's new drone startup just lost its most genius computer scientist.
We just lost our best genius to some new genius who's got a genius new idea. I'm going to have to find a new genius, or two half-geniuses, and fast.
He needs a computer scientist that can keep his startup from falling down.
I need Indeed.
Indeed you do. When you sponsor a job on Indeed, it's easier for talented candidates to find it, which makes it easier for you to hire them. Visit Indeed.com/credit and get $75 towards your first sponsored job. Terms and conditions apply.
This is KBLA Talk 1580, where hate meets a scholarly match.
Continuing our conversation with Dr. Marquita Gamet. She's at Cal State Northridge over the Africana Studies Department there, but also part of an incredible team of scholars who worked on this Los Angeles Reparations, the preliminary report. So what surprised you or shocked you, if that's even possible?
You know what? I would probably say the totality of all these findings resulting in what's termed the wealth gap probably is the most shocking. So it's one thing to kind of see them in their separate reports looking at the impact of racial terror or housing or health impacts, for example. But when we look at the wealth gap, for example, white families' median family income in Los Angeles is around $95,000 versus black families at $53,000. The median net worth of white households is around $355,000 versus black households at only $4,000. That's literally only a mere 1.1% of white wealth held by white households. And so when you look at that, and you kind of understand, well, why is it that? And unfortunately, there's too many stereotypes about the realities that black families face. And so the assumption is that, well, they haven't invested in education or haven't invested in good jobs or haven't had good spending habits. That could not be further from the truth. The thing that was most shocking is how all of these different systems have worked together to create this, what we're terming the wealth gap.
Yeah, I mean, it's really adding up. Just some of the things that I didn't even think about, like if you have, been covenanted out of a neighborhood, the impact on equity, it translates in real dollars to generational wealth. I always thought of it in terms of like, well, we should be able to live wherever we want to live, not as an impediment to us building wealth, which is significant.
Yes, absolutely. And we still see those impacts. You still see black neighborhoods, appraisal values are much lower than majority white neighborhoods.
Mm. Talk to me about some of the recommendations. I know these are real preliminary and maybe they're meant to guide the Reparations Advisory Commission, but they are important.
Yes, so the recommendations are preliminary considerations that the advisory committee could take into consideration as they make their final recommendations to the city. And our objective here was to take a justice-centered approach where we not only identify ways to begin for the city to acknowledge the harms through the data and through public acknowledgement, but also begin to repair those harms, and primarily through compensatory measures, so compensating people for these harms that have been done. But also there's an important part of reparations work that is preventing future harm, right? And so that's relation to the policies and to the community investments, for example, investing back into Black communities would have been taken out of them. And preventing the further exploitation of those communities is incredibly important in reparations research and work.
Let's go to Amin calling us from LA. Good morning, Amin.
Good morning.
You ready?
Hello?
Yeah, you're on the radio right now. Go ahead.
Okay, yes, ma'am. I was about to go there. But, redlining, the banking practices, where does that start and how did redlining affect us? And that's my question.
Yes, thank you so much, Amin, for your question. So, yes, redlining has also a significant impact. Redlining has been practiced nationally in a multitude of different ways, but when we look at it in terms of the city of Los Angeles, we see that banks use predatory lending practices in terms of lending to Black communities. Excuse me. They oftentimes also refuse to lend in those communities by labeling those communities higher risk, meaning that if they were labeled at higher risk, maybe it was harder for loans to be closed on those homes, for example, or higher interest rates. So those communities were considered undesirable on two different fronts in terms of redlining. Fronts in terms of environmental practices, when we talk about in that section on environmental injustices, where those communities may be considered less desirable because they had higher risk of pollutants, for example, of contaminants, of poor air quality, water issues, but also on the end of the appraisal end, if those communities are considered to be higher risk for all these environmental hazards, then they can also justify that they may be a higher risk to secure home loans for those communities. So redlining also significantly impacted Black Angelenos in their ability to secure loans, home loans in certain neighborhoods, and their ability to then have equity grow from those homes as a result of that.
Were you asking Amin about when that started? Okay, well, I guess we don't have him on the line anymore, but I think he was asking a little bit.
So just to be clear,
Yeah.
Oh, okay. So mid-20th century, you saw these restrictive practicing, redlining. For example, during the Depression era, you saw policies from the FHA, for example, policies from HELEC policies that were discriminating against minority communities through redlining. So the Depression era is a good pinpoint for when redlining was really at its highest impact.
So as a resident of LA or a concerned stakeholder, what ought we be doing? We've got a larger report that should be landing this fall, October, November, and then the Reparations Advisory Commission will ruminate on it for a little bit. They'll analyze it. They'll come up with their recommendations. Does it make sense, other than reading the report and tracking it, does it make sense for us to be watching what our city council decides to do as a result of this report, so that it doesn't just become this great source of data, but actually a source of action?
Absolutely. Not only watch, but become active. So actively contact those council members, actively contact your local representatives, engaging them, encouraging them to be on this subject matter, for them to read the reports themselves and engage, and to make sure your voices are heard in this process. Also, join us for additional community opportunities, or if the city and the Civil Rights Department is hosting any events, please come out, engage them. They'll be at the Taste of Soul this October. Come and share your opinion, share your voices, and make sure you're contacting your local representatives. Contact the local boards to make sure that this issue is being elevated.
Dr. Gamage, do you think that do you see this work changing people's attitudes in any way, as far as your fellow academics or city institutions. I mean, certainly the piece of the report that clearly shows the data that Black people were paid less by the city and kept out of stable, life-changing middle-class opportunities by the city is showing a direct impact of those policies on the ability to thrive of Black people in this city.
Yes, I think so. I think having solid research and all that data that we're putting forth helps make it very clear that we can no longer deny the atrocities that have happened historically and that continue to happen to this day. In the past, it has been a struggle to have that data, but we have it now. We can no longer deny it, and so that helps change attitudes. When the data is there, it's hard to ignore it.
Dr. Gamage, have you noticed among respondents, of course, mostly Black Angelenos, more willingness or more hopefulness that this might make a difference or more understanding of what's going on, increasing over the span of this work?
I have seen more hopefulness, especially in the last 3 community engagement sessions that we had. Folks came out, they wanted to, one of the sessions was during debate night, and folks came out and they wanted to engage. They were committed to making sure that their voices were heard. And so I think that folks are hopeful that this is a good opportunity to finally turn the page, and that page needs to be on reparations. So folks are saying, we know these realities. We live them every day. Our families live them. We know the stories. We are the stories. But now it's time that we begin to repair those harms and compensate Black Angelenos for those harms. And I think that that's the new attitude that folks are taking versus previous attitudes maybe like, well, we don't know if the city even values what's taking place in our realities and our experiences in our communities. So I think now folks are really honing in on the need for the city to compensate and pay reparations and restitutions as a result of these harms.
Dr. Marquita Gamage, we've got a minute and a half here. What do you want to leave us with this morning?
So reparations is a conversation that has really ballooned into a community action-driven approach to demand justice, equity, and freedom for Black communities. Please do not sleep on this opportunity to make your voices heard. Join us, call in, talk to your local representatives. We have to begin to elevate these issues, and we're at a historic point in time. Make sure that you do not skip out on this opportunity. You're going to be writing about this and reading about this in the future. Your children, your grandchildren will learn about this. So make sure you're a part of this historic moment. We invite you to continue to join us.
I love that. Like, stay on the right side of history because, this, I really feel like that's an important point, Dr. Gamage. This is not something that's happened in our community every day. This is a really big moment, and we need to push the line.
Yes, absolutely.
Well, Dr. Marquita Gamage, thank you so much for your work on this, and to all of the scholars, to the LA Civil Rights Department under the leadership of Attorney Capri Maddox, who just jumped in the chat, that you guys are doing important work for the city of Los Angeles, and we appreciate the effort.
Thank you so much. We appreciate your time today.
Phone lines are wide open next hour. Let's talk about it. Let's talk about what you took away if you've seen this report. Also want to weigh in on last night's, was it a town hall? Sort of a listening, talking session? Whatever that was with Oprah Winfrey and Vice President Kamala Harris. Certainly seems like it would be impactful. What do you think? KBLA Talk 1580.
KBLA 1580 Santa Monica.
I'm Mike Moore. Here's the latest from the Black Information Network. The White House is announcing $3 billion in federal funding for over 24 battery technology projects. The plan Hamas is unlikely before President Biden leaves office. The Wall Street Journal reported Thursday